They thought the anesthesia still had me. They thought I was just a tired old woman, fading away in a hospital bed. But I heard them, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, whispering with her lover about how to kill me before I woke up. If you've ever known the cold sting of betrayal, like and subscribe, because my story is a testament that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest warrior. The first thing I remember is the sound, not the sterile, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor or the gentle hum of the hospital machinery, but a sound that didn't belong, a low, conspiratorial whisper. It was like a snake rustling in dry leaves, a secret and venomous thing. For a moment, my mind, still thick with the fog of anesthesia, couldn't place it. My knee throbbed with a dull, distant ache, a reminder of the surgery, a routine knee replacement, they'd called it. At 68, I'd finally given in to the persistent pain, dreaming of morning walks without a grimace and dancing at my granddaughter's future wedding. The thought of it had made me smile as they wheeled me into the operating room. There was no smile now. The whispers continued, slicing through the morphine haze. One voice was male, smooth and confident, the kind of voice that could sell you a death sentence and call it a cure. I knew it instantly. Dr. Raymond Cross, the charming surgeon with kind eyes and a firm handshake who had assured me I was in the best possible hands. The other voice, that was the one that shattered me. It was my daughter, Lydia, my only child. The little girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose fevers I'd soothed through long nights, whose college tuition I'd paid by taking on extra shifts for 20 years. Her voice was different now, stripped of the daughterly affection I was so used to. It was sharp, impatient, greedy. "Is she stable?" Lydia asked, her voice a low hiss. "We can't have her waking up and making a fuss." "She's stable for now," Dr. Bacross replied, his tone professionally cold, but with an undercurrent of something else, something intimate. "The anesthesia is still wearing off, but the window is small. We need to act before the night shift change. A potassium chloride drip, untraceable. It will look like post-op cardiac arrest. It's not uncommon in patients her age." My heart, the one they were so casually plotting to stop, seized in my chest. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a side effect of the drugs. I tried to move, to open my eyes, to scream, but my body felt like a lead weight. My eyelids glued shut. I was a prisoner in my own consciousness, forced to listen to the two people I trusted most plan my murder. "And the papers?" Lydia pressed. "You're sure they're airtight?" "Completely," Dr. Cross said. I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "She signed everything over. The power of attorney, the deed to the house. That surgical consent form was a work of art. By the time anyone gets suspicious, the house will be sold, and we'll be sipping margaritas in Cabo. That beautiful Boston home is ours. My love, the house, my home for 40 years. The place where I'd raised Lydia after her father passed away when she was just 10. Every corner of that house held a memory. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen door frame, charting Lydia's growth from a toddler to a teenager. The worn armchair by the fireplace where I'd read her bedtime stories. The garden I'd poured my soul into, blooming with the roses her father had planted for me on our first anniversary. They wanted to kill me for bricks and mortar, for $1 million valuation. My life, my love, my memories, all reduced to a number on a real estate listing. The sheer coldness of it was what broke through the fog. A wave of adrenaline, potent and icy, surged through me, clearing my head. This wasn't a nightmare. This was a coup. My daughter, in league with this monster disguised as a doctor, was staging a hostile takeover of my life and everything I owned. I thought of all the sacrifices, the missed vacations, the double shifts, the quiet loneliness of a widow who poured everything she had into her child. I had done it all for her, to give her the life I never had. And this was my reward? To be disposed of like a piece of faulty equipment. A tear, hot and stinging, escaped my left eye and traced a path down my temple into my hair. It was a tear of grief, of utter or soul-crushing despair. But beneath it, a tiny ember began to glow. It was fury, a primal, protective rage that had been dormant for too long. They thought I was a fragile old woman. They thought they had already won. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My husband, a Marine, had taught me one thing: you never, ever go down without a fight. The operating room hadn't been my final battlefield. This hospital room was, and I would not lose. I lay there, motionless, letting my breathing remain slow and even, the perfect picture of a sedated patient. But behind my closed eyes, a plan was beginning to form. They had started a war. I was going to finish it. The storm broke just after midnight, a furious lash of wind and rain against the hospital window. It mirrored the tempest inside me. Every gust of wind felt like a scream, every crack of thunder a beat of my terrified heart. Dr. Cross and Lydia had left hours ago, after a final, chilling exchange. Lydia had leaned over me, her perfume, the expensive kind I'd bought for her last birthday, filling my nostrils. She'd smoothed my hair and whispered, "Rest now. Mom, it's all going to be okay." It was the most obscene lie I had ever heard. The doctor had then adjusted my IV drip, his hands clinical and steady. I watched him through the narrowest slits of my eyelids, memorizing the motion, the clear liquid he was adding to the bag. He said it was just a saline top-up. I knew it was the clock, ticking down the last hours of my life. I knew I couldn't stay. Every passing minute, every soft footstep in the hallway sent a jolt of panic through me. I was a lamb in a slaughterhouse, waiting for the butcher's return. My body was still a traitor, weak and clumsy from the surgery. My right leg was a dead weight, encased in bandages, and a fire of pain shot up from my knee if I so much as tensed a muscle. But fear is a powerful fuel. I began to test my limits, wiggling my fingers, then my toes. I pushed myself up, just an inch, against the pillows, my arms trembling with the effort. It was pathetic, but it was a start. The door creaked open, and I froze, my eyes snapping shut. A young woman in the pale blue scrubs of a nursing student stepped in. I'd seen her briefly before the surgery. She was young, maybe 22, with wide, tired eyes and a name badge that read Noelle. She moved quietly, her expression etched with a weariness that seemed too profound for her age. She checked my vitals, her touch gentle but distracted. As she reached for my IV bag, her fingers brushed against the port where Dr. Cross had injected the potassium chloride. She paused. A tiny frown creased her forehead. She looked from the IV to my sleeping form, and for a heart-stopping moment, our eyes met. I hadn't been quick enough to close them. Panic flared in my chest, but then I saw something in her eyes. It wasn't suspicion or alarm. It was recognition, a flicker of shared fear. She looked over her shoulder, down the empty, dimly lit corridor, then back at me. Her voice was barely a whisper, so low I almost missed it. "Mrs. Ellis? Are you awake?" I couldn't speak. I just held her gaze, trying to pour all of my terror and desperation into that one look. I gave the slightest nod, a movement so small it was barely perceptible. Her face paled. She knew. I didn't know how, but she knew. Last year, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was on this ward, a patient of Dr. Cross's, a Mr. Gable. He was recovering well from a hip surgery, better than expected. Then he had a sudden cardiac event in the middle of the night. Dr. Cross signed the death certificate himself. His family was very wealthy, and his son was very friendly with the doctor." Her eyes were glistening now. "I saw Dr. Cross adjust his IV just before it happened, the same way he adjusted yours tonight. I told my supervisor, but she dismissed it. I was just a student. What did I know?" Her words hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of my own death sentence. This wasn't the first time. Dr. Cross was a predator, hiding in plain sight. "He's scheduled to check on you at 4 a.m., she said, her voice gaining a sliver of resolve. "That's when he'll administer the final dose. We don't have much time." "Help me," I rasped, the words scratching my dry throat. A fierce light ignited in her tired eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen a wrong and could no longer stand by and do nothing. "The service exit at the end of the East Wing is rarely used during a storm. The security camera there has been flickering for weeks. If we can get you into a wheelchair, we can make it." The next 20 minutes were a blur of coordinated, whispered panic. With a strength that belied her small frame, Noelle helped me sit up. The pain in my knee was excruciating, a white-hot agony that made me want to pass out. But the thought of Lydia's betrayal and Dr. Cross's cold smile was a sharper pain. Noelle expertly and silently disconnected the IV line from my arm, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She helped me into a wheelchair she'd commandeered from an empty room, draping a spare blanket over my hospital gown. Every movement was a symphony of agony, every roll of the wheelchair's wheels down the hallway, a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. We moved like ghosts through the sleeping hospital. The rain hammering against the windows provided a desperate, welcome cover for our noise. We passed the main nurse's station, where the night shift charge nurse was engrossed in a paperback novel, oblivious. My breath hitched in my throat. We were almost there. The double doors to the East Wing exit were just ahead, a dark rectangle promising freedom. Just as Noelle pushed the door open, a gust of wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it against the wall with a deafening bang. We both froze, our hearts in our throats, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps, of the alarm being raised, but there was nothing. Only the howl of the wind and the relentless drumming of the rain. We were out. The cold, wet air hit my face, a shocking, beautiful slap. I was out of the tomb they had prepared for me. I was alive. And I was free. The sanctuary was a small, cluttered apartment above a bookstore, smelling of old paper, lemon tea, and a lifetime of memories. It belonged to Catherine, my friend of 50 years. We'd met in college, two bright-eyed girls with dreams of changing the world, and had stayed tethered through marriages, births, and the quiet, creeping sorrow of widowhood. When Noelle, bless her brave soul, had helped me into a taxi with the last $20 bill she had in her pocket, Catherine's address was the only one that came to my lips. It was the only place on earth I knew I would be safe. Catherine opened the door in her bathrobe, her face a mixture of confusion and alarm that quickly melted into horrified understanding as she took in my state. The hospital gown, the pale, rain-streaked face, the raw terror in my eyes. She didn't ask questions, not at first. She simply wrapped me in a warm, dry blanket, sat me in her softest armchair, and pressed a steaming mug of tea into my trembling hands. It was only when the warmth began to seep back into my bones that the dam finally broke. The story came pouring out of me in a torrent of sobs and jagged, broken sentences, the whispers, the house, the IV drip. Lydia. My Lydia. Saying her name was like swallowing glass. Every memory I had of her was now tainted, replayed in my mind through the lens of this monstrous betrayal. I saw her at age 5, her face beaming with pride as she showed me a finger painting of our family. I saw her at 16, weeping in my arms after her first heartbreak. I saw her just last week, smiling and hugging me, telling me the surgery was for the best, that I needed to take care of myself. Had it all been a lie? Every "I love you," every hug, every shared laugh, was it all a performance? A long con played on a naive, loving mother? The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I had lost my husband to cancer, my parents to old age, but this was a different kind of loss. This was an amputation. A part of my very soul had been carved out and thrown away. Catherine listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to a cold, protective fury. She held my hand, her grip firm, anchoring me in the swirling chaos of my despair. "That girl," she began, her voice low and dangerous, "has always been selfish. Margaret, I saw it. But this is evil." She was right. I had made excuses for Lydia my whole life. Her selfishness was just ambition. Her lack of empathy was her being focused. I had painted a picture of a perfect daughter because I so desperately wanted one. Now, the canvas was shredded, revealing the ugly truth underneath. The sadness inside me began to curdle, changing into something harder, colder. It was the anger I'd felt in the hospital, but now it wasn't just a spark. It was a slow-burning fire. They had not only tried to steal my future, they had poisoned my past. They had turned my love into a weapon against me. "I'm not going to let them get away with it," I said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. My voice was no longer trembling, it was steady. "I want to see them in jail, Catherine. I want to see them lose everything." A grim smile touched Catherine's lips. "Good," she said, "because my nephew is coming over. I called him the moment you finished your story." 20 minutes later, a young man with Catherine's sharp eyes and a serious, no-nonsense demeanor was sitting opposite me. His name was Ben, and he was a special agent with the FBI. He listened intently as I recounted the story again, this time with less emotion and more detail. I told him about the whispers, the phrase potassium chloride drip, and Dr. Cross's boast about the airtight paperwork. When I was finished, he didn't offer platitudes or expressions of sympathy. He just nodded slowly, his gaze analytical. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, his voice calm and professional. "What they've done is not just attempted murder. It's conspiracy, fraud, and given what your nurse, Noelle, witnessed with another patient, potentially serial murder for financial gain. This is my world. This is what I do." He pulled out a notebook. "We need to move fast and quietly. We'll start with the paperwork. You said you signed surgical consent forms. We need to get a look at what you actually signed. I can subpoena the hospital's records and your bank accounts. Has there been any unusual activity?" The question jolted me. I hadn't even thought about it. I'd given Lydia access to my accounts years ago to help me pay bills if I ever got sick. I trusted her implicitly. The thought was nauseating. Ben saw the look on my face. "It's okay," he said gently. "We'll find it. They think you're dead, or will be soon. They'll be getting sloppy. They'll make a mistake. And when they do," he paused, his eyes meeting mine, "we'll be there to catch them." In that moment, sitting in my oldest friend's apartment, with my life in ruins around me, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. It was a cold, hard, vengeful kind of hope. And my grief was still there, a gaping wound in my soul. But now, it had a purpose. It was the fuel for the fire that was to come. Lydia and her monster had tried to erase me. They were about to find out I was the kind of woman who wrote her own endings. The days that followed were a strange kind of purgatory. I was a ghost in my own life, confined to Catherine's small apartment while the world outside continued oblivious. Ben had been clear. I needed to remain invisible. If Lydia or Dr. Cross discovered I was alive, they would disappear, and the chance to bring them to justice would vanish with them. And so, I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. It gave my mind too much room to roam, to replay the betrayal over and over, each time with a new, agonizing detail. Ben and his team worked with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. He would visit Catherine's apartment late at night, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop, showing me the digital breadcrumbs that my daughter and her lover were leaving behind. The first blow came when he pulled up the documents from the hospital. There, on the screen, was my signature, shaky from pre-op nerves, on a document that was most certainly not a consent form. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Lydia absolute control over all my assets, effective immediately. And beneath it, another signature, on a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of my Boston home to her for the grand sum of $1. The clinical, legal language was a stark and brutal confirmation of their plan. They hadn't just planned to kill me, they had legally erased me first. The notary's signature is forged, Ben explained, pointing to a pixelated stamp on the screen. We ran it against the state database. The commission number is fake. They were arrogant. They assumed no one would ever look this closely. The next discovery was in my bank records. Small withdrawals at first, a few $100s here and there, dating back 6 months. I had barely noticed. I had assumed Lydia was using the money for groceries or household expenses as she'd claimed. But then, the week before my surgery, a large transfer, $50,000 moved from my retirement savings into an account I didn't recognize. Ben traced it. The account was under a shell corporation, and the sole signatory was Dr. Raymond Cross. They were draining me dry, systematically, while smiling to my face. The money I had painstakingly saved for my old age, the safety net I had built for myself, was being used to fund their future. I felt a new wave of nausea. I remembered a conversation with Lydia a few months ago. She'd been complaining about credit card debt, about how hard it was to get ahead. I'd offered to help, to give her a loan. She'd refused, patting my hand and saying, "Don't be silly. Mom, I can handle it. You just worry about yourself." She had been stealing from me even then, playing the part of the proud, struggling daughter while systematically pilfering my life savings. The premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden, desperate act. It was a cold, calculated campaign. Ben's investigation expanded. He started looking into the life of Dr. Cross. On the surface, he was a pillar of the community, a respected surgeon, a donor to local charities, a man with a flawless professional record. But Ben's team dug deeper, pulling property records, financial statements, and patient histories, and they found a pattern. "This is the interesting part," Ben said one evening, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. "Dr. Cross has a history of relationships with the daughters or wives of wealthy, elderly patients, and in 5 of those cases, over the last 10 years, the patient died unexpectedly from post-operative complications. In each case, the family member he was involved with was the sole beneficiary of the estate. The names and faces flashed across his screen, a distinguished-looking man who died after a simple gallbladder surgery, a frail woman who'd passed from a supposed infection after a hip replacement, all patients of the good doctor, All of their deaths had been ruled natural or unavoidable. All of their estates had been quietly liquidated, their assets transferred, and the grieving beneficiaries had, in time, moved on. It was a predatory, repeatable model of murder for profit. He was a serial killer who used a scalpel and a syringe instead of a knife or a gun. And my daughter had willingly become his accomplice. I looked at the photos of the other victims, their smiling faces from a time before they met. Dr. Cross. I saw myself in them, trusting, vulnerable, unaware of the viper they had welcomed into their lives. My fight was no longer just for me. It was for them, for Mr. Gable, the man Noelle had seen die, for all the others whose names were now just files in a cold case archive. "We have the paper trail," Ben said, closing his laptop. "We have the motive, and we have the means. Now we just need to rattle the cage. We need them to make a mistake in the real world, something we can act on. It's time to let them know a ghost is watching." He looked at me, his expression serious. It's time to make them nervous. The plan was simple, elegant, and cruel. Ben called it shaking the tree. I called it giving them a taste of their own terror. Through a carefully firewalled, untraceable email address, Ben's team sent a message to the main administrative desk at Boston General Hospital. The message was short, anonymous, and addressed to the chief of staff. It read, "Ask Dr. Raymond Cross about Mr. Gable's potassium drip and the Ellis surgery. Some ghosts are starting to talk." We didn't know how the hospital administration would react. And frankly, we didn't care. The target wasn't the hospital, it was Dr. Cross. The message was a pebble tossed into a still pond, and we sat back to watch the ripples spread. From the safety of Catherine's apartment, Ben had arranged for a low-level surveillance on both Cross and Lydia. It wasn't a full FBI tale. That would require more concrete evidence, but a discreet monitoring of their known movements and communications through legal channels. The ripple hit Dr. Waite-Nyaugs Cross the next afternoon. According to the surveillance report Ben read to me, Cross was called into a meeting with the hospital's chief of staff. He was in there for less than 15 minutes. He emerged pale and visibly agitated. He immediately canceled his afternoon surgeries, claiming a sudden migraine, and left the hospital. His first call was to Lydia. I could only imagine that conversation, the frantic, whispered questions. Who sent it? What do they know? Is it that nurse? The paranoia, once it takes root, is a poison that works fast. The rock-solid confidence Dr. Cross had displayed in my hospital room was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a man whose carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture. Their first mistake was meeting in person that same day. They chose a crowded upscale coffee shop, thinking they could blend in. It was an amateur move. Ben's surveillance contact, a woman who looked like just another student typing on her laptop, was seated 2 tables away, a directional microphone capturing their entire conversation. Ben played the recording for me that evening, hearing their voices again, this time laced with panic instead of predatory calm, was a perverse kind of vindication. "It has to be that student nurse." Lydia's voice was sharp, strained. "Noelle. She was on duty. She was asking questions after the Gable thing last year. I remember you mentioning it. She's a nobody." Cross snapped back, his smooth voice now brittle. "She has no proof. No one would believe her over me. It could be a disgruntled colleague, a rival. It could be anyone." "What about the papers?" Lydia asked, her voice dropping lower. "Are you absolutely sure about the paperwork? What if there's a loophole?" "It's ironclad, I told you," he insisted, but his tone lacked its earlier conviction. "The only way this falls apart is if your mother—" He trailed off, unable to say the words. "My mother is dead," Lydia said, her voice flat and cold. There was no grief, no sadness, just a statement of fact, a problem that had been solved. The cremation was 2 days ago. I have the ashes on my mantelpiece. I flinched. The thought was sickening. She'd likely procured some random ashes from a funeral home, creating a prop for her performance as the grieving daughter. She was putting on a show for the world while my actual body was hiding out in a spare bedroom, very much alive. Their paranoia escalated. The surveillance showed them arguing in their car. They started shredding documents at their apartment. But their biggest mistake came 2 days after the anonymous email. Driven by fear and greed, Lydia initiated the sale of my house. She signed with a cut-rate real estate agent who promised a quick, all-cash sale, well below market value. She wanted the money, and she wanted it now. "This is it," Ben said, showing me the online listing. My home, my beautiful, beloved home, was splashed across the internet with the sterile, impersonal photos of a crime scene. Selling the primary asset of a deceased person's estate so quickly after the death, especially when the deed was transferred for $1 just days before, is a massive red flag for financial crimes investigators. She's moving too fast. She's panicking. He pointed to the screen. And she did it online from her personal laptop, which means she's created a beautiful time-stamped digital trail right to our doorstep. They're no longer in control. Their fear is driving them now, and they're driving straight into our trap. Watching them squirm, listening to their panicked whispers, I felt a grim satisfaction. The fear I had felt, alone in that hospital bed, was now their constant companion. They had built their future on my grave, but they hadn't made sure I was in it. The cracks in their perfect crime were turning into gaping chasms, and soon, their entire world would be swallowed whole. Just when I thought the net was tightening, it was Noelle who returned and cinched it shut. She appeared at Catherine's door one evening, looking even more tired than she had in the hospital, but with a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was clutching a worn, leather-bound journal to her chest like a shield. After our escape, Noelle had, on Ben's advice, laid low. She'd called in sick to the hospital, claiming a severe case of the flu, giving herself time and distance from the hornet's nest she had kicked. But she hadn't been idle. The ghost of Mr. Gable, the patient she had watched die under Dr. Cross's care, had weighed on her conscience for a year. My case had been the final push she needed to turn her suspicions into action. She'd spent the last few days talking to other nurses, not directly about Dr. Cross, but about hospital protocols, about unexpected patient deaths, about the little inconsistencies that haunt the hallways after a tragedy. I knew I wasn't the only one who thought the Gable death was strange, she said, her voice low but steady as she sat at Catherine's kitchen table. People are afraid to talk. Dr. Cross is powerful, well-liked by the board. Accusing him is career suicide. She took a deep breath. But then I remembered another nurse, a woman named Clara, who retired right after Mr. Gable died. She was his primary nurse. She was devastated, said she felt like she'd missed something. I found her. She's living in a retirement community upstate. Noelle had taken a bus and gone to see her. At first, the older nurse had been reluctant to talk, fearful of causing trouble. But Noelle's earnest desperation and the mention of my name had opened a floodgate. Clara had kept a private nursing journal, a habit from her early days in the profession. In it, she documented everything: vitals, dosages, patient conversations, and her own personal observations. Noelle opened the journal she was holding. The pages were filled with neat, slightly faded cursive. She pointed to an entry dated the day before Mr. Gable's death. "Listen to this," she said, and read aloud. "October 14th, Robert Gable in high spirits today. Joked about beating me at gin rummy once his hip is healed. Vitals are perfect. Recovery is textbook. Dr. Cross came by for evening rounds. seemed unusually chummy with the patient's son, who was visiting. After the son left, Dr. Cross personally administered Mr. Gable's evening medication and adjusted his IV. He said it was a new vitamin supplement to speed recovery. It wasn't on the chart. When I questioned it, he was very charming. Said it was a new protocol he was trialing and he would add it to the orders later. He told me to take an early break, that he would watch the patient himself. I thought it was odd, but he's the senior surgeon. An hour later, Mr. Gable coded. We couldn't bring him back. Dr. Cross ran the code himself. He seemed calm, too calm. Ben, who had arrived while Noelle was telling her story, took the journal and read the passage himself, his eyes scanning the page with intensity. "This is it," he breathed. "This is the whole ball game." "There's more," Noelle said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Clara said that after the death, she saw Dr. Cross slip the son his business card, but on the back, he had written the name of a financial advisor. She saw it. She never forgot it." Ben looked up from the journal, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. A first-hand, contemporaneous account from a medical professional detailing uncharted medication administered by the doctor just before an unexpected death, he said, speaking as much to himself as to us. "This corroborates the pattern of behavior. It establishes a clear Oh, this isn't just about fraud anymore. This elevates everything to homicide." He turned to Noelle, his professional demeanor softening for a moment. "You have no idea what you've done, young lady. You've just blown this case wide open. This journal gives us what we need to get a warrant for a full, invasive investigation into Dr. Cross. We can get his personal financial records, his phone records, everything." Looking at the young nurse, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This quiet, unassuming student had shown more courage than people twice her age. She had seen an injustice and refused to look away, first by helping me, and now by pursuing the truth for a man she barely knew. She was haunted by a death she couldn't prevent. And in trying to find justice for Mr. Gable, she had become the key to my own. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you, Noelle," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You are a remarkable young woman." She simply nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. It was a tear of relief, of exhaustion, of a burden finally shared. The journal lay on the table between us, its worn pages a testament to a quiet truth that had refused to stay buried. It was the proof we needed. Dr. Cross's carefully constructed empire of death and greed was about to come crashing down, brought to ruin by the memory of a good nurse. With Clara's journal in hand, the nature of the investigation changed. It went from a quiet, clandestine operation to a full-blown federal offensive. Ben secured the warrant from a judge in a closed-door hearing. The case was now officially a multi-homicide investigation, with Dr. Raymond Cross as the primary target and Lydia as his co-conspirator. The full weight of the FBI was now bearing down on them, and they were completely oblivious. They were still wrapped up in their frantic, amateurish attempts to liquidate my assets, blind to the storm that was about to break over their heads. The next few days were a masterclass in methodical takedowns. Ben's team executed the warrant on Dr. Cross's financial records, and what they found was a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and money laundering schemes that made my stolen $50,000 look like pocket change. He had amassed a fortune of over $10 million, a fortune built on the graves of his patients. They found wire transfers between his accounts and the accounts of the grieving family members he had consoled, including the son of Mr. Gable. The money trail was a damning indictment, a bright, clear line connecting death to profit. Simultaneously, they subpoenaed the phone records, The calls and texts between Dr. Cross and Lydia told the rest of the story. They painted a picture of a predatory courtship, of Cross targeting Lydia months before my surgery, seducing her with promises of wealth and a life free from the burden of an aging mother. I had to read the transcripts, as painful as it was. I saw my daughter, in her own words, complaining about my stubbornness, my old-fashioned ways, the financial drain of my eventual elder care. I was not a person to her. I was an obstacle, a line item on a balance sheet. Reading those messages felt like a second betrayal, colder and more calculated than the first. He had not corrupted a good person. He had simply found the greed that was already festering in my daughter's heart and given it a goal. The final piece of the puzzle was preparing the trap. Ben explained that a quiet arrest, while easier, might allow them to destroy evidence or try to flee. He wanted to catch them red-handed in the act of finalizing their crime, and the sale of my house was the perfect bait. They've accepted an all-cash offer from a buyer, Ben explained, sitting with me and Catherine in the apartment, which now felt like a war room. The closing is scheduled in 2 days. The buyer, of course, is an FBI front. The plan was for the buyer to insist on a final walkthrough of the house with Lydia present. Just before the funds were scheduled to be wired, they would stage a problem, a supposed issue with the plumbing, to get Lydia and Dr. Cross, who would undoubtedly be with her, into a specific room, my living room, the room with the large bay window overlooking the garden. Once they are both in the house, in that room, the tactical team will move in, Ben said. It will be clean, fast, and undeniable. They will be caught trying to sell a property that they acquired through fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. My role in this was small, but deeply, personally satisfying. Ben needed a formal statement from me, a detailed chronological account of everything I had heard and experienced, signed and sworn, but he also needed something for the raid itself. He handed me a simple, one-page document. It was a revocation of the power of attorney she had tricked me into signing. When we make the arrest, he said, the lead agent will hand this to your daughter. He will inform her that not only is the sale of the house void, but her power of attorney has been revoked by your authority. He will tell her that you are alive and well, and that you are the primary witness in the case against her. I looked down at the paper, at the line waiting for my signature. This piece of paper was more than just a legal document. It was a declaration of my existence. It was the sound of my voice, breaking the silence they had tried to impose on me. It was the checkmate move in a game I never asked to play. They had tried to turn me into a ghost, a forgotten memory, but with a single stroke of a pen, I would become the most real, most terrifying thing in their world. I would be the ghost that came back to haunt them, not from the grave, but from the witness stand. I picked up the pen, my hand perfectly steady, and signed my name. The trap was set. The day of the raid was unnervingly quiet. I sat in Catherine's apartment, the phone on the table in front of me, waiting for Ben's call. The silence was a stark contrast to the storm of activity I knew was unfolding across town. I pictured the FBI tactical team, dressed in dark gear, assembling silently in the streets around my neighborhood. I pictured the decoy buyer, an undercover agent, walking up the driveway to my home, a place I suddenly wasn't sure I ever wanted to see again. Every tick of the clock was a drumbeat counting down to the final confrontation. Ben had a live feed of the audio from inside the house, and he relayed the key moments to me over the phone. His voice was calm, a steady anchor in my sea of anxiety. The agent is inside, he began. Lydia is there, and Cross just pulled up. He's with her. They're both in the house. My heart hammered against my ribs. I closed my eyes, picturing them. my daughter and her lover, standing in my living room, smug and triumphant, on the verge of securing their blood money. I imagined them looking out the bay window at the roses, my roses, without a single thought for the woman who had planted and tended them. "They're doing the walk-through," Ben continued. "Our agent is leading them to the living room now. He's mentioning the plumbing issue behind the wall. They're taking the bait." I held my breath. This was it. "Stand by, Margaret." Ben's voice was tense. "The team is moving in." The next 30 seconds were the longest of my life. I could hear nothing but the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, Ben's voice returned, sharp and clear. "It's done. They're in custody." He put his phone on speaker, and I could hear the background noise from the scene, shouted commands, the sound of Lydia, her voice not cold or calculating now, but a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "What is this? You can't do this. I own this house." And then I heard the lead agent's voice, calm and cutting. "Ma'am, you don't own anything. The sale is void." There was a rustle of paper. "This is a revocation of power of attorney, signed this morning by the legal owner of this property, Margaret Ellis." A moment of pure, stunned silence. I could feel it, even miles away. The entire world, for Lydia and Raymond Cross, had just tilted on its axis. Then Lydia's voice again, confused, desperate. "Margaret, but she's dead." "No, ma'am," the agent replied, his words landing like hammer blows. "She's very much alive, and she's the one who made the call." The shriek that followed was not one of anger, but of pure, unadulterated shock and terror. It was the sound of a predator realizing it has been outsmarted, the sound of a world built on lies collapsing into dust. They had been so sure of their victory, so confident in my demise. The knowledge that I was alive, that I had been the architect of their downfall, was a punishment more profound than handcuffs. Ben later filled in the details. They had found their bags packed in the trunk of Cross's car, along with first-class tickets to Mexico for a flight that evening. They were caught, quite literally, in the act of escaping. Their faces, Ben said, were masks of disbelief. Dr. Cross, the pillar of the community, the master manipulator, was rendered speechless. Lydia, my daughter, simply crumpled, her carefully constructed facade of the grieving heiress dissolving into that of a common, greedy criminal caught in the act. I hung up the phone, a profound, shuddering wave of relief washing over me. There was no joy, no triumphant cheer, just a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion and the grim satisfaction of a battle won. They were caught. It was over. The whispers in the dark had been answered, not by my death, but by the slam of a jail cell door. I had survived, and in surviving, I had taken back not just my life, but my name, my home, and my story. In the weeks following the arrest, my life became a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I was no longer a ghost. I was the star witness. I gave my testimony to federal prosecutors, my voice clear and unwavering as I recounted the whispers I heard in that hospital room. Noelle and Clara gave their statements, their bravery providing the crucial corroboration that built an ironclad case. The story exploded in the Boston media, the surgeon of death and his heiress accomplice. My name was kept out of the papers, at my request, but the details were salacious enough to capture the city's attention for months. Lydia and Dr. Cross, faced with a mountain of evidence, the financial records, the forged documents, Clara's journal, and my testimony, had no choice but to take a plea bargain to avoid a trial that would have almost certainly ended with a life sentence. Dr. Cross pleaded guilty to 5 counts of second-degree murder and numerous counts of fraud. He would die in prison. Lydia pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 25 years. She would be an old woman by the time she got out. The youth and beauty she had prized so highly, gone. I never saw her again after that day in the hospital. I refused all contact. Her lawyer sent letters, filled with manufactured remorse and pleas for my forgiveness, for a mother's mercy. I burned them without reading past the first line. Forgiveness was a currency she had not earned, and my mercy had been spent. With the legal battle over, I was left to face the ruins of my personal life, and at the center of those ruins stood the house. The FBI had cleared it. The surveillance equipment was gone, but it was no longer my home. It was a crime scene, a monument to betrayal. Every room held a poisoned memory. The kitchen where Lydia and I had baked Christmas cookies was now the room where she had plotted my death over the phone. The living room where I'd read her bedtime stories was where she had been arrested. The love and labor I had poured into that place had been desecrated. I knew I couldn't stay. To heal, I had to leave the past behind, literally. So I decided to sell it. This time, for real. The process was a painful but necessary exorcism. I walked through the house one last time, with Catherine by my side. I didn't pack everything. I took only the things that belonged to my life, not the life that had included Lydia. I took my husband's books, my mother's porcelain tea set, the box of old photographs from before Lydia was born. The rest, the furniture we'd picked out together, the artwork she had convinced me to buy, her untouched childhood bedroom, I left for an estate sale company to clear out. It was a brutal act of curation, separating the truth of my life from the long, elaborate lie. The hardest part was the garden. My roses were in full bloom, a riot of color and fragrance. My husband had planted the first bush for me, and I had added to it over the years. It was my sanctuary. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the familiar scent, my fingers tracing the delicate edge of a petal. I remembered Lydia as a little girl, helping me weed, her small hands patting the soil. It was a memory that should have been sweet, but now it only brought a dull ache. "You can always plant a new garden, Margaret," Catherine said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. She was right. I couldn't take this garden with me, but I could take the knowledge of how to make things grow. I could take the memory of the love that had started it. That was something Lydia could never touch, never poison. I sold the house 2 months later to a young family with 2 boisterous children. I saw them through the window during the final inspection, the little boy chasing his sister across the lawn where Lydia had once played. They were filling the space with new laughter, new memories. They were cleansing it. I took the check from the sale, a sum that was, with a grim sense of irony, substantially more than the quick sale Lydia had arranged, and I walked away without looking back. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I wasn't a victim cowering in an apartment anymore. I was a woman with a fortune she had earned twice over, and a future that was, for the first time, entirely my own. The money from the sale of the house sat in my new bank account, a formidable number on a screen. It was my compensation, my justice, the spoils of a war I never wanted to fight, but it felt sterile, meaningless. What good was a fortune when the person you thought you'd share it with was the reason you had it? I could travel the world, buy a penthouse, live a life of quiet luxury, but I knew that wouldn't fill the cavernous hole in my life. The betrayal had taught me a harsh lesson. Money was a tool, but purpose was a destination. The idea came to me one evening while I was having dinner with Catherine and Noelle. Noelle, who had finished her nursing degree with flying colors, was telling us about a patient she was caring for, an elderly woman whose son had convinced her to sign over her house to him for safekeeping and was now trying to evict her. The story was sickeningly familiar. The details were different, but the architecture of the betrayal was the same. The abuse of trust, the weaponization of love, the vulnerability of age. "It happens all the time," Noelle said, her young face filled with a righteous anger. "Financial abuse of the elderly. It's a quiet crime. Victims are often too ashamed or too scared to report it, especially when it's their own children." And that's when it clicked. All the pain, the fear, the rage. I could let it consume me, or I could forge it into something useful. My story was a nightmare, but my survival gave me a unique perspective. I understood the shame. I understood the love that blinded you to the truth. I understood the mechanics of the crime. And now, I had the resources to fight it. That night, the idea for the Second Breath Foundation was born. It wasn't a grand, abstract charity. It was a focused, tactical organization. Its mission was simple: to provide legal and financial resources for elderly women who were victims of financial abuse at the hands of their family members. We would fund forensic accountants to uncover hidden transactions. We would hire tenacious lawyers to fight fraudulent property transfers. We would provide temporary housing for women who, like me, found themselves dispossessed and with nowhere to turn. Selling the house had been my first breath of freedom. This foundation would be my second. It was the purpose I had been searching for. It was a way to give my pain a meaning beyond my own story. It was, in a way, the sweetest revenge. Lydia and Dr. Cross had tried to kill me for money. I would now use that same money to empower women just like me, to dismantle the schemes of predators just like them. I hired a small, dedicated team, with Catherine as the head of the board and Noelle as our lead patient advocate and intake specialist. Our first case was the very woman Noelle had told me about. We hired the best real estate lawyer in Boston. We got an injunction to stop the eviction. We uncovered the fraudulent transfer, and we won. The son was charged with fraud, and the woman got her house back. I met her afterward. She was a frail woman with terrified eyes, and she held my hand and wept, saying we had given her back her life. In her eyes, I saw myself. I saw the victim I had been, and the survivor I had become. The Second Breath Foundation wasn't just about justice, it was about restoration. It was about giving women back their homes, their security, and most importantly, their dignity. I never built another garden as big as the one I'd left behind. Instead, I built this. An organization that planted seeds of hope in scorched earth. Lydia had taken my daughter from me, but she had given me hundreds of new ones to fight for. She had tried to end my story in a quiet hospital room. Instead, she had inadvertently started the most important chapter of my life. My name was Margaret Ellis, and my second breath was just beginning. The storms of life, I've learned, are not meant to simply be endured. They are meant to be navigated. In their fury, they strip away everything that isn't essential, leaving you with the bare, unshakable truth of who you are. My storm took my daughter, my home, and my trust in the world. But it left me with myself, a self I had not truly known, resilient, resourceful, and much stronger than I had ever believed. There is a quiet power in starting over when you thought your story was finished. My revenge was not in the prison sentences of those who wronged me. That was merely justice. My true revenge is in the peace I feel each morning. It's in the gratitude I see in the eyes of the women we help. It is the quiet, profound satisfaction of turning a legacy of pain into a legacy of purpose. They tried to buy my death, But with that same money, I am now funding the lives of countless others. That is an irony I savor every single day. The world will remember Dr. Cross as a monster and Lydia as his foolish, greedy accomplice. But I am the one who gets to write the epilogue. What do you think is the hardest betrayal to recover from? Have you ever had to find the strength to start completely over? Let me know in the comments below. And please, if this story touched you, like and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories.